Thank you. And as always, a welcome, robust debate. I can't help but point out the humor, and my good friends in the oil industry didn't have the time to prepare their response until just recently, given the very impressive numbers they put together on their lobbying resources here in the state. But I am more than happy to work with them to address what are, I think, legitimate concerns. I think they've overread some of the language. It's not the intent of this legislation to put them out of business, to penalize them for Dogger's behavior, though. If you look at the history and the stories that came to this very committee, the industry has been somewhat complicit with Dogger, so they're not without blame. But that being said, the goal here is not to punish anybody. It's to ensure that the state agency does what state agencies are supposed to do on behalf of the public, and that is to protect public health and safety. And the data is very clear that wells have been closed, that the U.S. EPA had to come in and intercede for the protection of the state's water supply because our own state agency wasn't doing that. And so what we've done with this bill is we've simply refocused the agency on what its responsibilities have to be. We're not saying you cannot approve oil drilling. That is not what is in this bill at all. This is not an attempt to burden the oil industry. It is an attempt to assure that the public health and the public safety is paramount in what we do. And to the extent the oil industry can demonstrate that what they are doing does not in any way impact public health and safety, and particularly when it comes to water supplies. That's what we're focusing on here. That's what the U.S. EPA focused on. That's what we learned in these hearings, is there has been no consideration for anything other than the mandate, drill, baby, drill. That is not what I believe the intent is of the mission of this organization. And what this legislation does is to reiterate that public health and safety come first, and that the oil industry, as it wants to drill, has got to show what they're doing and to assure us that this is not going to impede our aquifers, which right now are so threatened by just nature. And so I'm happy, as I said, to work with them and work with this committee. There is work to do on this legislation, but I think that the basic goal of protecting the public and not impeding legitimate oil and gas development that is done for the purposes articulated for our energy independence, and I have assured Senator Hueso that that is not the intent of this bill to impede, but rather to make sure that we're working on all cylinders, if you will, protecting the public and having an agency do what agencies in the state are supposed to do. We haven't made it any more onerous. In fact, we've asked that they comply with existing policies that are used by many other agencies in terms of time frames for the approval of various processes. That's what we're asking for here. I would ask for your aye vote. We'll continue working on this to see how we can best accommodate the reasonable concerns that have been articulated today. And with that, I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Senator Jackson. Senator Allen?
My only comment is that I think that Senator Hueso expressed my thoughts about this very well.
Okay. Are you on the Energy Committee as well? Okay. I'm certainly supporting this today, and I think, Senator Jackson, we sat through these hearings, so it's wrong, not just the one in March, but over the last 2 years, and it's been a challenge for Dogger, and they've made some changes in supervision and new personnel, and trying to act a little more like a traditional agency with more transparency and accountability rather than a permitting authority. And it's sort of a cultural shift over the 100 years. And so the good news is everyone says the definition is needed, and they're very close to getting it. We want that. Representatives from the oil companies also all agree that data management is absolutely essential, and supporting that. There is some recognition of transparency, and some of the challenges the oil company faces is we didn't create the problem with the underground ingestion control programs. It was lack of oversight or miscommunication, however you want to characterize it. But it's not, the public now is getting very, very concerned about not only fracking, but traditional oil drilling as well. So I think you have a lot of work ahead of you, but I think your goals are admirable, and I certainly support them and would recommend an aye vote.
And the motion is do pass as amended to environmental quality. Senators Pavley?
Aye.
Pavley, aye. Stone? No. Stone, no. Allen? Allen, aye. Fuller? Hertzberg? Hueso? Jackson?
Aye.
Jackson, aye. Monning? Wolk? That's three.
And I was just going to direct my staff to look, I don't know enough about the entire section relating to supervisor and maintenance and operations. I'm not,
Happy to.
so if there's anything that can be cleaned up on some kind of those clerical, that would be helpful.
Great.
Thank you,
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members.
Senator Allen. How about your non-controversial bill?
Good morning.
And then all they do is. I'm left.
Well, thank you so much, Madam Chair and members of the committee. And I also want to take a moment to thank the committee for its very thorough review of this issue. And I'm most pleased to take the amendment suggested in the analysis.
Right?
So SB 637 seeks to address a recent court ruling which found that California's regulatory program of suction dredge mining violated the Federal Supremacy Clause in the 1872 Mining Act because the state's Department of Fish and Wildlife did not have the authority to fully mitigate all of the environmental impacts as directed by the legislature, and thus could not issue permits and lift the moratorium on suction dredge mining. Now, this bill empowers the State Water Resources Control Board to use its regulatory powers under the Federal Clean Water Act to address the water quality issues associated with suction dredge mining. This addresses both the gap in regulator activity and clearly ensures that California's regulatory program is in line with federal protections and the court's concerns. And we know that suction dredge mining can cause serious environmental impacts. According to a 2003 study by the Water Board, the power equipment used by suction dredgers to vacuum up river stream beds causes a plume of often mercury-laden sediment to travel downstream, which is harmful to water quality, public health, endangered species, and cultural sites. Now, folks on the committee who know much about this issue know that there was a lot of mercury that got into the rivers during the gold rush in the 19th century. And so we're still feeling the impact of this as a result of particular activities that happen in the rivers. Now, in a letter to the Department of Fish and Wildlife from 2013, the Water Board said that recreational suction dredging as a whole has a disproportionately greater effect on mercury resuspension, which is like agitation and redistribution of the mercury, when compared to other natural events or other types of human activity. And in 2011, the USGS, Geological Survey, reported that suction dredge miners mobilize and change toxic metals such as mercury that are currently buried under rocks and mud down in the rivers. This action makes mercury more available for transformation into toxic methyl mercury. Members of the Karuk tribe from the Klamath River region of the state sued the state in 2005 to restrict suction dredge mining activities in their region because of the impacts of this activity on green sturgeon and salmon, both of which are on the endangered species list. As a result, the Department of Fish and Wildlife was ordered to conduct an environmental review of the activity. And in 2009, the legislature temporarily banned suction dredge mining until that review was complete. And in 2011, it called on the department to require full mitigation of the environmental impacts before issuing a mining permit. So the department issued its final environmental impact report in 2012, but it recognized that despite the legislature's requirement, the department did not have the authority to regulate impacts to protect public health, water quality, or cultural sites, and thus could not issue permits that guaranteed these protections. They made the point at the time that other agencies, such as the State Water Resources Control Board, have jurisdiction over those types of impacts. Now, in January this year, the San Bernardino Superior Court ruled that federal mining law preempted the department's regulations of suction dredge mining on federal land, since the department could not legally issue permits. The court commented that the state's laws related to suction dredge mining needed clarification. So by requiring the State Water Control Board to regulate the discharge of pollutants into waterways resulting from suction dredge mining as it regulates every other discharger under the Federal Clean Water Act, this bill, SB 637, addresses the court's ruling directly. It closes the gap in California's statutory framework regarding suction dredge mining by both giving the appropriate agency authority to deal with the water quality impacts and by ensuring that suction dredge mining activity conforms to both state and federal protections. In this era of acute drought, we need the Water Board there, ensuring that human activity doesn't adversely impact water quality. So I have here with me today Izzy Martin from the Sierra Fund, who's going to speak in support and assist in answering questions. And also here today is Craig Tucker, who's on the Tribal Council of the Karoo. Thank you so much.
Before we hear from your witnesses, I would like to again note that the Senate Environmental Quality Committee will be discussing and voting on issues relating to water quality, including mercury. We're here mostly on the impacts to fish and wildlife here today. And so that would really help. It's meant to help the testimony and what can be considered today, but we certainly would welcome any written information being given relating to mercury. Please give it to the Committee on Environmental Quality.
And with that in mind, Madam Chair, for folks in the audience to know, if this bill does pass out of committee, that Environmental Quality Committee hearing will be on the 29th.
29th. Thank you very much for clarifying that for people who would like to attend or send in letters prior to that. It's helpful if it's several days ahead of time, because then we can make sure that it's in members' packets and it can be analyzed as part of the record. So, Ms. Martin, welcome.
Thank you, Senator Pavley and members of the Natural Resources Committee. My name is Izzy Martin. I'm speaking here today for the Sierra Fund and also the Sierra Nevada Alliance, a 90-member organization that represents groups all over the Sierra Nevada. The Sierra Fund was invited to participate in the Public Advisory Committee put together by the Department of Fish and Wildlife a few years ago, and as part of that, we learned a lot about suction dredge mining. One thing we learned was when the suction dredge miners were sent out a survey to find out how many of these folks were out there. There's about 3,000 permits given out every year, most of them to Californians. We learned that of those 2,956 residents that year, about 3% of them reported that dredging income contributes more than 10% of their annual income. That's about 90 people. The Sierra Fund has been concerned about the impact of suction dredge mining for a variety of reasons. We will certainly have talked a lot about the water quality impacts, and hearing what you're saying, I'll talk about that in front of the Senate Environmental Quality Committee. But it's also important to realize that suction dredge mining has a very important impact on a number of endangered species, including and other wildlife, for example, passerines. It's great to see the amendment that's being considered today, which says that the Department of Fish and Wildlife should consider more than just fish. They should consider the entire part of their name, fish and wildlife. We have documented peer-reviewed science which shows the very dangerous impact of these machines on a variety of different sorts of animal species. Well, I think the only important thing we're trying to have this bill do is say, if you're a hobby miner, if you're doing this for fun, you should not be doing it to destroy our water, our environment, public health, endangered species. For the 90 people that are doing it professionally, they should obey the rules that all other professional miners in the state have to obey. They should get a water discharge permit if that's what they need. If they're moving more than 1,000 cubic feet of material, they should get a SMARA permit. If they're in an area where there's endangered species, they should get a take permit. This isn't saying that these miners should have to do anything that every other professional miner in the state doesn't have to do. I don't understand why there's a loophole to these regulations for a hobby And I would ask that you pass this bill. Thank you very much.